This is the flip class video for Honors Algebra 1, section 9.6. And just to kind of draw your memory back to what we talked about in section 9.5. In 9.5, we looked at how to factor and solve trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And in every case, last time, a was equal to 1. Every single time, a was equal to 1. And so this time what we're going to do is we are going to look at ax squared plus bx plus c when a doesn't equal 1. So we're going to look at today. We'll start off by looking at maybe the setup for a little application problem. This is going to use the vertical motion model again. So just a reminder that that's h equals negative 16 t squared plus vt plus s. The h stands for height, or height at any time. The t stands for time. The v stands for starting velocity, and the s stands for starting height. Okay, so take a look at number 1. Baseball player releases a baseball at a height of 7 feet with an initial vertical velocity of 54 feet per second. Let's start by setting up our vertical motion model. Pretty much every time, the only thing you're going to really be able to use or plug in at the start is the v and the s. You're going to be given a starting velocity, you're going to be given a starting height. You plug in for those and you've got your vertical motion model. So, let's see here. I've got h is equal to negative 16t squared plus, it says initial, that means beginning, vertical velocity of 54 feet per second. So I think my v is 54. And then plus s, s is the starting height. So he releases the baseball at a height of 7 feet. Let's say my starting height is 7 feet. So that's the vertical motion model. I've plugged in for v, I've plugged in for s. Pretty typical that those are the two things you'll plug in for. All right, so the question is, how long will it take the ball to reach the ground? So to reach the ground, what would the height of the ball be? It'd be 0, right? It's back on the ground. So I'm going to plug a 0 in for h. Got 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 54t plus 7. All right, so I got to be honest with you, having the a be a negative number is not something that I'm particularly fond of. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply the whole thing through by negative 1. That'll change the signs a little bit. So I'll get 0 equals positive 16t squared minus 54t minus 7. So it's at this point we recognize that a is not 1 anymore. So I can't just do this over here and look for the factors of c and see which one of those adds up to be negative 54. It's not going to work anymore. So we're going to have to introduce a new method. This new method, when a is not 1, is called split the middle. I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of methods for this. Some of them are kind of cutesy and tricky, and you know, some of them seem to fit well with others, and some, you know, don't work so well with certain folks. Split the middle is a very solid method. I've seen a lot of folks retain this well. But if this is not working for you, feel free to drop by and see me at a business lunch or something sometime, and I'd be happy to show you other methods, because there are certainly a lot of other methods. In this video, I'm going to be consistent. I'll use split the middle because I don't want to confuse you. But here it is. Here's split the middle. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply a times c. So your a value is 16. Your c value is negative 7. So when you multiply those together, you get negative 112, I think. Yeah, negative 112. All right, now our job with negative 112 is pretty simple. We're going to look for the factors of negative 112, and we're going to try to figure out which of those factors adds up to be my b. Of course, right there. Well, numbers are kind of big, but this is a relatively simple one to do. You know, let's start off with a small number and a big number. You know, like 112, you know, like 2 times 50 is 100. So 2 times 56, right? Of course, this is a negative number, so it needs to be something like negative 2 times positive 56. When you add those up, you get 54, and so we're really close. So we're looking for negative 54. So if I just make it 2 times negative 56, I get negative 54, and I'm good. I've got it. Okay, so here's what we do with AC. Here's where we're going to split the middle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite like this. I'm going to write 0 equals 16t squared, and then I'm going to write plus 2t minus 56t, and then still minus 7. So what I've done here, if you look at it, this middle term used to be negative 54, and still, if I were to add those like terms back together, I would still get negative 54t. So I haven't messed anything up here. What I have done is I have rewritten the middle term to make the factoring possible, to make the factoring easy. So here's what we do. We're going to group the first 2 terms like this. And then we're going to group the second 2 terms. I'm going to squeeze a plus sign in there so we don't get confused. And we're going to factor the greatest common factor from each of those terms. So I've got 0 equals, what's in common in the first grouping? Well, between the 16 and the 2, there's a 2 in common. And between the t squared and the t, they both have a t. So I'm going to write what's left over in this first group. It's going to be 8t plus 1. All right. Now, in the second term, what's in common? Well, first of all, recognize there's no t's in common. Both terms don't have a t. But notice how with the negative 56 and the negative 7, they both have a negative 7, right? Because 7 times 8 is 56. So I'm going to factor out the negative 7, and here's what's left over. Negative 56 divided by negative 7 is 8. The t didn't go anywhere. Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is 1. So here's what's interesting. The leftovers on both groupings are the same. So what I can do is I can bring those out. I can factor out, essentially I'm factoring out the GCF again. So 0 is equal to 8t plus 1. And then the leftover here in the first term is the 2t. The leftover in the second term is the minus 7. So I've done it. I've factored this thing out perfectly. Okay, so now it's just a matter of using the zero product property. 8t plus 1 equals 0. 2t minus 7 equals 0. So I'll squeeze this in right here. T is equal to negative 1/8. T is equal to 7 over 2. Now for our problem, only one of these answers makes sense. The negative 1/8 makes no sense because he can't throw the ball up in the air and then 1/8 of a second before he threw it, the ball lands on the ground. Now clearly the positive time here, the bigger time, is the one that makes more sense. Okay, so what we're going to do for the next couple of problems here is we are going to practice that factoring skill that we just talked about, split the middle. So, at any point, feel free to stop the video. These numbers are smaller. These problems are a little bit easier than the baseball problem we just did. But, try these on your own. Watch the video, see how it goes. Okay, so once again, the idea here is we're going to be factoring and solving these trinomials where the a value is not 1. So take a look at number 2 here. You recognize right away we've got this trinomial. We're just going to be factoring it. Notice that a is 2. So our first step will be to find AC. So a times c would be 2 times 7. So AC is 14. So we're going to do the same thing we've always done. We're going to try to find the factors of 14 that add up to be the b. So, 2 times 7 is 14, but 2 plus 7 is 9. But it's not 15, so that doesn't work. We could try negative 2 times negative 7, but those add up to be negative 9, so that doesn't work either. So the only other factors that work would be like 1 times 14. And of course, that's the one that works, because 1 plus 14 is 15. So we're now going to split the middle. Here's how it looks. 2y squared plus 1y plus 14y plus 7. Once again, all I've done is I've taken this middle term, the 15y, and I've split it into 2 parts. that work. It's a very strategic, it's a very intelligent splitting of that middle. Okay, once we've split the middle, we're going to group the first two terms. We're going to group the second two terms. And we're going to factor out the GCF from both of them, from each of them. Okay, so in the first one, the only thing in common in the first one is a y. They both have a y. I mean, the first term has an extra, but they both have a y. So the y comes out. Here's what's left over. 2y plus 1. Now in the second term, there's no y's in common, but there's a 14 and a 7, and the common factor there is 7. So plus 7. Now if you pull the 7 out of 14, you get a 2. The y didn't go anywhere. If you factor a 7 out of a 7, you get 1. Looky there. And so our leftovers match. They should always match. If they don't, there was a mistake made somewhere. So now I'm going to factor out the leftovers. So the 2y plus 1s factor out. What's left over in the first term is the y right there. So y is left over. What's left over in the second term is the 7. So plus 7. At this point, I've factored it. I've created a multiplication problem out of an addition problem. And of course, to check this, simply FOIL back together. And you should end up with what you started with. Okay, number 3. Once again, notice that a is not 1. So whenever a is not 1, you've got this trinomial you're supposed to factor. The first thing we're going to find is we're going to find AC. So a times c would be 30. All right. Let's figure out which factors of 30 add up to be negative 17. Well, let's see here. It's supposed to add up to be negative 17, so all the numbers that I list here probably should both be negative. So let's try this. Maybe I go like negative 6 times negative 5. Well, that adds up to be negative 11, which is kind of close, but it's not right. We're looking for negative 17. We're looking for the B. Let's see here. What if we did negative 3 times negative 10? Well, that's even closer because that's negative 13 when you add them. It's still not right. Maybe you've seen it already. It's negative 2 times negative 15, right? Those two multiply to be 30. They add up to be negative 17. So again, we're going to split the middle. So I'm going to write it as negative 3r squared minus 2r minus 15r minus 10. Okay, once we've done that, our next step is to group. I'm going to group the first two, I'll group the second two, and I'm going to put the plus sign in between there just so we don't accidentally think this is multiplication all of a sudden. All right, and I'm going to factor out the the greatest common factor. So in the first grouping, the only thing in common is an r this time. What's left over is negative 3r minus 2. Okay, so in the second term, remember I want my leftovers to match. And so I see with the negative 15 and the negative 10, I see that there's a 5 in common. And there is also a negative in common, but if I bring that negative out, I'm not going to end up with the same leftovers. So I'm just going to bring out the 5. So plus 5 times negative 3r minus 2. I'm just undistributing that 5. And notice, like I said, I was shooting for having the same leftovers, and they are the same. So I'm going to factor those out. So I get negative 3r minus 2. The r is what's left over now, and the plus 5 is left over. Once again, I factored it. I could easily check this by foiling back together. Hope you're getting the hang of this. Okay, so now we're going to switch back to solving. So let's see here. If we solve something like this, we got 3 terms, we got a trinomial, and notice the a is not 1. So we're going to have to use this split the middle method. So AC is what we do first. So AC would be 2 times 5, and that's 10. I got to figure out which numbers multiply to be 10 and add up to be negative 11. So again, since we're trying to add to be a negative number, and the 10's positive, all the factors that I list should both be negative. So negative 2 times negative 5, how about? That doesn't work because that's negative 7 when you add. But negative 1 times negative 10, that works. So once again, we'll split the middle. So we go 2c squared minus 1c minus 10c plus 5 equals 0. Once we've split the middle, we are going to group. So I group the first two, and I group the second two. And I'm going to sneak a plus sign in between there, once again, so we don't get confused and think that this just turned into a multiplication problem. First grouping, the common factor is c. What's left over? 2c minus 1. So I want to have that 2c minus 1 be my leftover in the second one. So I see the common factor of 5, but I think I'm going to bring out a negative 5 so that my leftovers are the same. So negative 5 goes here. If I bring out a negative 5, the negative 10 becomes 2. The c didn't go anywhere. And if I pull a negative 5 out of a 5, I get minus 1. So my leftovers match. All right, I'm going to factor out my leftovers. So I get 2c minus 1. The new leftovers are c and negative 5. So c minus 5 equals 0. So now the extra step here is just to use the zero product property and solve. So I'm going to come over here. It's going to be 2c minus 1 equals 0. C minus 5 equals 0. So we get c equals 1/2. C equals 5. Two separate answers here. They both work. You can always check these by plugging back in. You can check your factoring by refoiling. All right, a couple more to go here. Hope this is going well for you. Take your time and as necessary, stop if you want. Stop the video, try, play the video, and check. Okay, so number 5, once again, it's a solve. And because it's an equation, I can get rid of all those negatives. I would prefer to not have negatives if I don't have to. So my first step here is going to be to multiply by a negative 1. So that's going to give me 2x squared plus 9x plus 4 equals 0. Because it's an equation, I can do that, and that's going to make things a little bit easier for me. Okay, obviously a is not 1, so I'm going to find my AC first. So 2 times 4 is 8. I'm going to figure out which numbers multiply to be 8 and add up to be my b. In this case, that's 9. So, 2 times 4, that works, but it adds up to be 6. So it doesn't work here. Really, the only other option is 1 times 8, right? And, of course, that does work because 1 plus 8 is 9. All right, so I'm going to split the middle. 2x squared plus 1x plus 8x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, once I've done that, I'm going to group. So in the first grouping, the only commonality is an x. What's left over is 2x plus 1. And in the second term, the common factor, the greatest common factor, is 4. So I bring out the greatest common factor. I'm left over on the inside with 2x plus 1. Again, I'm just really undistributing, like we've been doing this for a long time. That's really all I'm doing here. And I'm going to undistribute one more time. I'm going to undistribute the 2x plus 1s. So it's 2x plus 1 times what's left over is x and a plus 4. And that equals 0. Final step here would be to use the zero product property. 2x plus 1 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. And now we solve. X is equal to negative 1/2. X is equal to negative 4. All right, so I think we'll do 2 more here. Again, encourage you strongly, try this on your own. Notice, we're going to solve here. A is not 1. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find AC. So AC is 12 times 2. Of course, that's 24. All right, so I'm going to try to figure out which factors of 24 add up to be negative 11. So again, let's be smart about this. If we're supposed to add to negative 11, the two numbers probably are both going to be negative. So, maybe we do negative 6 times negative 4. Well, that adds up to be negative 10. That's really close, right? It's not there. What other numbers multiply to be negative, or what other numbers multiply to be 24? Well, it's a little tricky. Sometimes people don't see this. You probably did. It's negative 3 times negative 8. That works because negative 3 plus negative 8 is negative 11. Matches my b. So we're going to split the middle. 12n squared minus 3n minus 8n plus 2 equals 0. So as always, after I split the middle, I'm going to group the first two and group the last two and factor out the greatest common factor. Okay, so what's in common here? Let's see here. I see, well, with 12 and 3, the common factor is 3. I've also got an n in common. So what's left over is 4n minus 1. Now in the second grouping, again, I want the leftovers to match, so I'm going to be really careful about this. I see with the 8 and the 2, the common factor is 4. But if I'm going to make the leftovers match, I actually need to factor out a negative 4. So I'm going to bring out a negative 4. A negative 4 factored out of a negative 8 gives me, or excuse me, it's not a negative 4, it's a 2. Sorry about that. There we go. It's a 2 in common. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2. I was one step ahead of myself. What's in common, or what's left over here, is the 4. So a negative 8 divided by negative 2 is a 4. The n didn't go anywhere. I had a 2, and I brought out a negative 2, so I'm left over with a negative 1. All right, so I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor again, and that's the 4n minus 1s. So 4n minus 1 comes out. What's left over is 3n minus 2. Final step here would be to use the zero product property and solve. So n equals 1/4, n is equal to 2/3. Okay, I think we'll skip the very last one, but number 7, just a little terminology thing here. I think we'll set this up and then I'll have you, I don't know, maybe we'll check your answer in class, next class. So whenever it says find the zeros, what that really means, it's very simple. Finding the zeros is simply plug a 0 in for f of x. So 0 equals 3x squared minus 17x plus 20. That's really all that means. And notice that your a is not 1, so you're going to have to do AC. So AC here is going to be 3 times 20, and that's 60. But I think I'll leave this one up to you. I think I want you to try this on your own, finish this out, and we can check your answer tomorrow in class, because we've already done 6 examples, and I think you've probably seen enough for the moment. So anyhow, see you next class. Hope this went well for you. And like I said, if this method doesn't work for you for some reason, and I do have other methods, I'd strongly encourage you to try this. This is the one I've seen best retained, but I do have other methods for you if you're interested.